Hello, everyone. My name is Amy C. Willis. I am the Holistic Sober Coach. I've been working professionally in the addiction recovery space since 2019. I have been sober since 2016 after struggling with a pretty severe alcohol addiction personally, and also losing my dad to his alcohol addiction. And only since getting sober and stepping outside of normative alcohol culture have I really started to learn the truth about alcohol in terms of its inherent risks, harms, and impacts. Over the last 5 years of working in this space, what's become clear is how little awareness there is around alcohol's negative impacts on us as individuals, communities, organizations, and beyond. And ultimately, we are all impacted by alcohol in one way or another. I am deeply passionate about telling the truth about alcohol, not to coax or convince everyone into sobriety, but instead to equip people with information so that they can make informed, empowered decisions about their bodies, their lives, and their wellness. Given how ubiquitous alcohol is and how inherently harmful it is, it only makes sense that we have just as much access to accurate information around alcohol as we do to alcohol itself. Alcohol is a women's issue, it's a health equity issue, and it's an issue of consent. Through powerful conversations like these, I am confident that we can and will shift normative alcohol culture and ultimately reduce the harms caused by alcohol.
Thanks, Amy. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you today as we're collaborating on workplace well-being and what the impacts are and the trends are in order to support the mental health crisis that we're currently in. I'm Jocelyn Pepe. I am a fractional head of well-being, and I am a mental health researcher and coach. And I work to support organizations with a whole systems approach to workplace well-being through strategies and structures to really support a whole and well culture change. I have personal firsthand experience witnessing and being impacted by alcohol and addiction in my life. And I felt the effects of it for most of my life on how the impact that has on people around them, and how people who are suffering with alcohol are really in a state of suffering, and often it's not really a choice. When I had my first child at 27, I really stopped drinking as much as I had in my early years. And that was because my body really couldn't tolerate it anymore. And I wanted to be a really conscious and present mother. So no amount of alcohol really felt good waking up with kids. And I continued that. And then 3 years ago, I suffered a traumatic brain injury cycling, and I actually stopped drinking completely in order to reduce the neurotoxic effects of alcohol in my brain, in order to really recover without the neuroinflammation that is associated with alcohol. And I'm really passionate about this topic and this conversation so that we can begin to break the stigma around mental health and the impacts of alcohol, and how socially acceptable it is right now, and the detrimental impacts it has on mental well-being. So I know you have a lot of great information to share with us. Our first conversation today is one out of a series of 3, and we are going to be talking today about the awarenesses of alcohol. In our second session, we're going to be talking about perspective shifts. And in our third session, we are going to be talking about action and how to take action. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Amy, to share a little bit further about really create some more awareness around alcohol and its effects.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, I'm very excited about this conversation series as well, which I didn't say off the top, but I should have. So again, as I said in my intro, I'm really passionate about telling the truth about alcohol. There is a ton of misinformation out in the world, and that makes it really challenging to make informed decisions for ourselves when it comes to alcohol. So as Jocelyn mentioned, alcohol is neurotoxic. It is also an inherently addictive substance. It is psychoactive, and it's also responsible for more than 3 million deaths annually, or 5.3% of deaths worldwide, and is the leading cause of death in people aged 15 to 49. In the Western world, alcohol consumption has become exceedingly normalized. It is baked into the fabric of our society, and largely through this normalization process, we've stopped questioning it. We've stopped asking if it's actually in service of us or our well-being. Alcohol was classified as a Group 1 carcinogen in 1988 by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which means that we've had this information about the relationship between alcohol and cancer for more than 35 years. But yet, many of us are still not aware of this connection, and this is largely by design. So the global alcohol industry, or big alcohol, significantly shapes the messaging and narratives when it comes to what we think and know about alcohol. And this is largely done through expensive ad campaigns and aggressive lobbying efforts to influence global alcohol policy. The global alcohol industry was valued at $1.3 trillion in 2021, with expected growth to reach more than $2 trillion by 2031. And in 2023, it was estimated that the alcohol industry spent more than $7 billion on advertising and marketing. And what this tells us is that they are investing a lot of money to really control the narrative and shape public perception of alcohol. And this amount of money wouldn't be spent unless those advertising efforts were effective. As such, there is a lot of conflicting and confusing information out in the world, which makes it really challenging to have a clear understanding of what alcohol is and isn't. There are numerous risks and harms involved with alcohol consumption, not just to the person consuming it, but also for friends, family members, community members, and beyond. It's not uncommon to see articles which highlight possible benefits associated with alcohol, but what's really important to know is that whether there are potential benefits or not, every single alcoholic drink carries inherent harms and risks with it. Standard drinks are how we measure consumption, and standard drinks vary depending on where you live. So Google it, Google what a standard drink is in whatever region you happen to be in. And it varies depending on the amount and the type of alcohol you're consuming. So in Canada, where we live, a standard drink might look like a 12-ounce beer at 5% alcohol. It might look like a 5-ounce glass of wine that's about 12% alcohol. It might also look like a 1.5-ounce shot of spirits or hard liquor, which is 40% alcohol. So having a sense of standard drinks, what that actually is, what that looks like, as well as how much we're consuming, is really important in our day-to-day life when we're starting to increase our own awareness and really tuning into how we are consuming alcohol. Yeah, so that's a little bit about alcohol facts. So now we're just going to change gears and talk about alcohol and health. So both the World Health Organization and the World Heart Federation have clearly stated that there is no safe level of alcohol use for humans, and the safest amount to consume is none at all. So in 2023, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction released updated guidelines for low-risk drinking based on the latest data and evidence. So in order to stay in that low-risk range, it is recommended that no more than 2 standard drinks per week are consumed, both for men and women. So beyond this, beyond those 2 standard drinks, risk of a whole host of issues increases. And while those guidelines are specific to Canada, I'm really hopeful that they are blazing a new trail globally when it comes to understanding levels of harm and risk. And I really hope that other countries will follow suit. Alcohol consumption is a causal factor in more than 200 diseases, injuries, and other health conditions. Alcohol is a depressant, and we know it negatively impacts mood and mental health. We have data that demonstrates that alcohol worsens depression and anxiety symptoms. Yet, alcohol is also used by many to manage anxiety and stress and depression. We know that alcohol negatively impacts our sleep, our mood, our mental health, our energy, our stress levels, our digestion, and so much more. Alcohol is causally linked to at least 7 different types of cancer, including breast, throat, mouth, esophagus, liver, and colon. Obviously, breast cancer is predominantly a women's health issue. And outside of genetic and hereditary factors, alcohol is the leading risk factor for breast cancer. And for women who are consuming 1 standard drink per week, that is increasing their risk of developing breast cancer by 14%. So that's significant. And yeah, I see you shaking your head. And we have a lot of data around awareness levels of the relationship between alcohol and breast cancer. And globally, those awareness levels range between 20 and 30%, which means that 70 to 80% of us are unaware that alcohol is a risk factor for breast cancer. And again, like, this is why we are having these conversations, because there is so much confusing messaging out in the world and people just don't know the facts, and it becomes really hard to manage your wellness and manage your risk when you just don't know what you're dealing with. So that's why we're having these conversations. And timely enough, April is Alcohol Awareness Month, so it seems great that we're having this conversation at this point in time. Also timely, at the end of March of this year, results came out from a pretty big study on alcohol and heart disease. And these results were announced at the 2024 annual scientific meeting for the American College of Cardiology. And the results were staggering, particularly for women. So what this study revealed was 8 or more standard drinks per week increase women's risk of heart disease by 45%. So 3 to 7 standard drinks per week increase that risk by 29%. And for women reporting binge drinking, which is significant, and more women than men engage in binge drinking behaviors. And within this study, binge drinking was considered 3 standard drinks per day. So essentially, you're doing your drinking in a smaller period of time. For women reporting binge drinking, that increased heart disease risk by 65%. So these are big numbers. Just as an overview, this study involved 430,000 participants. 189,000 of those participants were women. It was conducted over a 2-year period. And, you know, this information, these data really fly in the face of some of the antiquated narratives, particularly the one that tells us a glass of red wine a day is great for heart health. We have data, we have, you know, the World Heart Federation that's clearly stating that the opposite is true. And, you know, if you were to follow that old protocol of a glass of red wine a day, particularly for women, you would be increasing your risk of both heart disease and breast cancer. So this is why we talk about these things. We also know that alcohol use during menopause can not only worsen menopause symptoms, but can also increase women's risk of things like osteoporosis, also heart disease. We know that alcohol affects every major system and organ in our bodies in negative and varying ways. And what we're seeing is, you know, smaller amounts of alcohol carry a negative impact and carry a negative consequence. So every drink really matters and every drink really counts. And so drinking less is reducing harm. It is better for us. And in the long run, drinking less or eliminating alcohol altogether is highly impactful in positive ways for your health. Any questions or anything before we carry on? Because I've just been talking and it's a lot of information, but how's it all landing? Were you surprised by anything that I shared?
The surprising statistics for me were around the sensitivity of women and alcohol. There is a lot of attention right now in the world and also in the corporate well-being space around women's health, a lot around menopause and perimenopause. And I know that you have information on the effects of alcohol around impacting menopause and menopausal symptoms. So I really feel like this goes hand in hand with the direction of corporate well-being and corporate benefits in really supporting women's health and men's health. That is the mental health crisis right now. So I so appreciate you sharing. And I'll dive in a little bit deeper once you're ready with a little bit more around the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the burden or the cost of alcohol. So again, it is costly to us all. So when we look at where alcohol impacts systems, so things like healthcare, the business sector, the legal sector, alcohol costs all of us billions of dollars every single year. So alcohol is responsible for 5.1% of the global burden of disease and injury. Globally, substance use disorders impact 10 to 20% of the population, with alcohol use disorder being the most common substance use disorder. And while technically not a clinical disorder, and I think you speak about this as well, Jocelyn, heavy regular drinking or binge drinking, which again depends and varies depending on where you live, are exceedingly common in developed countries, affecting 1 in 4 adults. So that's a lot of people. Beyond the health consequences, which are substantial, alcohol causes significant social and economic losses to the individual and to society. Alcohol consumption causes death and disability relatively early in life, which subsequently cuts one's capacity short to contribute in meaningful ways to the world. So in people aged 20 to 39 years of age, approximately 13.5% of total deaths are attributable to alcohol. So obviously we're talking on a global scale, but we both live in Canada, so I'm more familiar with the Canadian data. But the Canadian Substance Use Costs and Harms Report, which covers a period of time between 2007 and 2020, provides an overview of the cost impact of alcohol and other substances, again, across healthcare, business, and legal sectors. And according to this report, alcohol accounts for $19.7 billion, or 40% of the total costs across these sectors, and is the most costly substance by a significant amount. So within the business sector, because we're talking about workplace impact and harm, lost productivity is defined as the lost value of work due to premature death, long-term disability, and short-term disability, which includes absenteeism and impaired job performance, also called presenteeism, which would capture things like employees coming into work hungover and that negatively impacting their work capacity and performance. In 2020, lost productivity attributable to substance use accounted for $22.4 billion, or approximately $600 per person. And in this same year, there were nearly 74,000 substance use attributable deaths, of which more than 24,000 were under the age of 65. And hold on to your hats for this next number. This translates to 345,000 potential years of productive life lost. So, and this is not specific to Canada. So we are seeing big numbers like this in other parts of the world. So in the US, for example, lost productivity costs in the workplace are around 179 billion annually. Those are numbers taken from 2019. In Australia, this number is around 3 billion a year. In the UK, it's more than 7 billion pounds annually. And so, these are big numbers. These are big costs. So I hope what's clear from this overview is that alcohol carries a huge burden and has far-reaching negative impacts on individuals, on society, and the workplace is included in that. And this impact is felt through physical and mental health issues, which translate into significant health, social, and financial cost. This points to really an urgent need for increased awareness and education efforts to bolster knowledge and shift perspectives and behaviors in an effort to reduce costs and harms across the board.
Wow.
Yeah.
That feels really, really significant to hear all of that information around health, impact, presenteeism, absenteeism, like billions and billions of dollars and billions of I feel like as you add it up, it's so many years lost, like years lost of life. It's really staggering to hear all of that information in one place. So I appreciate that incredible overview. I really want to highlight what's so important, and this was some of the work and study I did as I did my master's in the psychology and neuroscience of mental health. One of the courses was in it was in addiction, and it was really raising awareness to the impacts of alcohol in the brain. So that's really where my focus has been, and bringing that into the workplace, because the work that we do is really when we're thinking about a lot of the workplaces. So some of workplaces are really needing to tap into the cognitive performance and executive function of individuals, and alcohol impairs this ability. However, even if we're talking about manual labor and the actual physical impact of alcohol in the system and not being clear and crisp, there's physical harm that can be done to somebody's body by not being totally conscious and aware of everything that they're doing. So, it's a depressant. Alcohol is a depressant, we know. It impacts thinking and behavior. And cognitive performance, which is really what I wanted to highlight. And I think some of the statistics that you were sharing were so valuable, that there is such a spectrum of alcohol use. And one of the ones that I came across that really impacts workplace is that problem drinking is 4 times more as common as severe alcohol dependence. And so what we're talking about, we're bringing a whole spectrum of knowledge to the workplace right now, and the impact on the workplace is around those 1 to 2 to 3 drinks a day or after work or in a week that can really impact the presence of individuals in the workplace. So I don't want to continue to bring in the statistics around alcohol. What I would really love to do is start to talk about what this has to do with the workplace and how this gets integrated into workplace well-being programs. And so I have noticed some trends in Canada around increased hiring in the disability space. There is a lot to talk about, like the uptick in disability claims around mental health. And what we want to look at from a workplace perspective is mental health strategies, well-being strategies, and DEI and DEIB strategies with alcohol in the workplace, because the workplace can both contribute to or ameliorate the use of alcohol from stress levels or culture type conversations. And so there's a real topic around mental health, and though we're talking about it more since the pandemic, it's still quite stigmatized. So my hope through these conversations is that we can destigmatize some of the conversations around alcohol use and the actual why people are turning to alcohol in the first place. And it's to relax, to unwind, like you had talked about stress, to relax, to unwind, to decompress. But we know that those are actually inhibiting those de-stressing, unwinding, relaxing, because it's having a negative impact on the physical body and the brain and the sleep mechanisms. And so with mental disorders in the workplace, most of everybody who is working and having a mild to moderate level of a mental disorder or impairment are a working population. And so when we think about the work design, working conditions, and workplace culture, employee mental health is impacted, and that includes substance use. And so a lot of stress we know in the workplace can happen when people are in high psychological demand, but low power, so middle level management. Also, obviously, there are certain professions that have higher levels of stress. And I know you had found one that talked about the legal profession being the top profession with alcohol or substance use abuse. And 1 in 5 attorneys use alcohol, which is abuse alcohol, which is double the national standard. And so these studies are really staggering. And the healthcare profession is also another high stress industry, which is interesting that would be kind of the second one where a profession is really going to alcohol to numb or relax or not feel the feelings that they really need to feel. So when we think about the workplace too, there's a couple of other conversations that I think are important. And we have the most generations in the workplace right now than we've ever had before, all at the same time. So from a generational perspective, alcohol use in the workplace is also really important, because what we know is that the younger generations are not turning to alcohol as much as the older generations. And they're also the generation that can be most impacted, because most mental health disorders are onset in like late teens and early adulthood. So we're seeing a positive trend in that shift, but we're also seeing a trend in uptick of one of the core generations in the working population, mid-30s to mid-50s, that are turning to alcohol more than ever. And so when we think about EAP and the various different levels of support within an organization, that's really critical and important. And also external perspective and external experts are also important to create some awareness. And in our final conversation around this, we'll get into a bit more of a breakdown of how to integrate this type of work into your workplace well-being strategies and culture. And so some of the statistics around the generational differences in the workplace alcohol consumption right now are really interesting, and I found them interesting. So 62% of adults under the age of 35 say they drink, which is down from 72% 2 decades ago. So that's a 10% decrease, which is a really positive trajectory. So I also feel like it's really important to highlight the positives that are coming out of greater awareness. And there are so many non-alcoholic beverages that are available that still feel like you're engaging in a social or relaxing situation. However, you're not getting any of the negative health benefits or neurotoxic effects. But the statistic that I just shared, the increase in alcohol consumption in 35 to 54-year-olds is a bit terrifying. And that is a population where we're seeing increases in, depression, anxiety, mental health disorders. And that's where we were talking about women specifically in this, late 40s, early 50s, going through menopause and the impacts that has on those populations. And there's also an increased drinking in adults age 55 and older. So we have positive trends. We also have some other trends that I think our work will really help and support. And then the other area of the workplace that I think this conversation really lends itself to is the diversity and inclusion strategies. When I was doing the research for this conversation, I learned that on the World Health Organization's website, the statistic is that just close to half of the world's population does not drink alcohol and has been lifetime abstainers. So that makes me consider what populations globally are heavy in the alcohol consumption. And I think that that's an important conversation as our workforce becomes increasingly global, with immigration, expats, with more of a globally working workplace. When close to half the world's population doesn't drink, the inclusivity part of this conversation is important because traditional conferences, networking, building your career, building your business aren't going to work for everybody in the workplace anymore. And so it's not going to work for the younger population. It's not going to work. I think there's really something to pay attention to in DEI initiatives and the belonging initiatives, as well as the workplace well-being initiatives. Additionally to that, I wanted to kind of highlight, just in a general sense, the working population that is coming into work can be struggling with addiction, can be struggling with stress management, therefore coming into the workplace hungover, which is impacting their performance. And so any type of environment that is encouraging alcohol and alcohol consumption could be very triggering or very isolating for any individuals who are suffering. Or for example, like me, when I first stopped drinking, it was kind of weird. I was like, do I go out? Do I not go out? How do I go out? So just like questioning myself in that space. And now I love going out because so many places can make alcohol-free cocktails that are beautiful. So shifting from a cocktail culture to a mocktail culture, but the inclusivity part is ensuring that you're not just offering wine or beer, and you're offering something really lovely that people who don't want to drink can drink, that's not just like soda water, or keeping it like, so everybody's engaged at the level that they want to be engaged at. So those are kind of some of the key trends that I really felt were important to highlight from a workplace perspective. The workplace, from a cultural model, the workplace really impacts drinking in behaviors of individuals and social groups, and it impacts behaviors that expand into employees' families or the local community. So I think there's the micro picture of the individual and how that impacts them, and then there's the macro picture of the families who are involved and the local community. And my hope is that this conversation today raises awareness, because oftentimes there can be denial, loss of control, or a lack of awareness around the impacts of alcohol and just not knowing. So that really is kind of where I want to leave it at for this first conversation around alcohol and awareness in the workplace. So Amy, as we conclude this topic, and our next session will be on creating some perspectives and really heightening a perspective shift around alcohol in the workplace. Is there anything that you would add to conclude?
I mean, I continued, as I'm hearing you talk and building on what I shared. I'm so invigorated by this conversation, even though a lot of, particularly what I shared, is pretty heavy and serious, and absolutely it is. I also feel very hopeful and very excited about how we can create change, and to just really communicate that there are alternatives that can look different, that are more well-being focused, that are more inclusive, that are actually in service to the individual and organizational health. And so I just continue to feel so excited about this conversation. I'm so glad that we're having it. And I truly hope that we, shifted some perspective around awareness today through this conversation. And I'm just very excited for the next two chats that we get to have.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your collaboration today. If anybody has any questions, Amy and I will share our information with you. Reach out at any point in time if you're looking to know more about alcohol culture, if you're looking to incorporate more strategies into your workplace well-being or inclusion strategies. We are partners to really facilitate change in the health and well-being of the global population. So thank you, and we will reconvene with you in our next session around shifting perspective around alcohol in the workplace.
Thanks.